December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m., the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 80,000 German soldiers open fire simultaneously. Not a skirmish, not a probe. A wall of steel and fire stretching across 85 miles of frozen forest, hitting American lines with a force no one saw coming. Artillery shells obliterate entire foxholes. Tiger tanks crush half-tracks like tin cans. Soldiers who were drinking coffee 60 seconds ago are now dead, buried under collapsed snow and shrapnel. The temperature is -15 Celsius. The sky is a ceiling of gray concrete. No air support is coming. The radios are screaming with voices that stop mid-sentence. In the first 6 hours, 3 full American divisions are shattered. In the first 24 hours, the Germans advance 40 miles. By December 19th, the ancient fortress town of Bastogne is completely surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division, 11,000 men, is trapped inside with 4 days of ammunition, no winter clothing, almost no food, and surgeons operating by flashlight in a basement, while shells fall through the roof above them. Allied command is paralyzed. Senior generals are talking about strategic withdrawal. The word nobody wants to say out loud is circulating in private. Defeat. Then, on December 19th, in a cold conference room in Verdun, France, one man says 3 words that make every general in the room either laugh or fall silent. 3 days. His name is General George S. Patton. And what he does next, in 72 hours, will be studied in military academies for the next 80 years as either the greatest feat of logistics in military history or proof that one man's refusal to accept the word impossible can change the outcome of an entire war. This is not the movie. This is not the legend. This is what actually happened, documented in after-action reports, German intelligence files, and the private letters of the men who were there. 5 moments. 5 times Patton did what every professional soldier said could not be done. And by the end of this, you will understand exactly why Hitler personally feared one American general above all others, why German commanders requested specific briefings on Patton's location every single day, and why the most elite military force in history spent more energy trying to predict one man's next move than tracking entire Allied army groups. We start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the war, but the beginning of the moment when Germany first realized they had a problem. July 1943. The Mediterranean is burning. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, is the largest amphibious assault in history at that point. 160,000 troops, 3,000 ships, 4,000 aircraft, 2 armies. One objective: take the island, open the road to Italy, put pressure on the southern flank of the entire Axis war machine. The plan is clean, logical, and built around a fundamental assumption that shapes everything. Montgomery's 8th Army, Britain's finest, will drive north up the eastern coast toward Messina, the prize, the port city that controls the strait between Sicily and mainland Italy. Patton's 7th Army will land on the western coast, protect Montgomery's left flank, and support the main effort. Support role, secondary mission, holding the door open while the professionals walk through. The British planners who designed the operation considered this arrangement obvious. Montgomery was the hero of El Alamein. He had beaten Rommel, the Desert Fox, in North Africa. The Americans were newer to the war, less experienced, still learning. You do not give the critical mission to the student. You give it to the master. Patton read the plan in his tent, alone, and said nothing. His staff watched him. They knew the silence. It was not the silence of acceptance. July 9th, 1943. The invasion fleet crosses the Mediterranean through a storm that almost cancels the entire operation. Waves 6 feet high. Men vomiting below decks on every transport ship in the convoy. Senior officers recommending postponement. Patton orders the fleet to continue. When his own chief of staff expresses concern, Patton writes in his diary that night, "If we turn back now, we will never have the nerve to go again. We go." July 10th. The landings begin. Under fire, through surf, in darkness, American and British soldiers hit the beaches of Sicily simultaneously. The confusion is immediate and severe. Units land in the wrong sectors. Equipment is lost in the surf. German and Italian defenders respond faster than expected. In the first hours, the invasion hangs in the balance. Then, something shifts. Patton's forces stabilize their beachhead faster than anyone anticipated. Within 36 hours, 7th Army is organized, pushing inland, capturing airfields. The initial crisis passes. Now comes the moment the plan anticipated. Patton secures his area, turns east, and begins the methodical work of protecting Montgomery's flank as 8th Army drives toward Messina. Patton looks at the map. He looks at the terrain between his position and Palermo, the largest city on the island. A city nowhere in the original plan. A city that sits on the northern coast like a prize no one thought to claim. He looks at the mountains between here and there, terrain the British planners described as impassable for armored vehicles. He calls his corps commanders. "We are going to Palermo." His staff reminds him, "Sir, the plan. Montgomery, the flank." Patton's response is precise and final. Montgomery has his mission. We have ours. Our mission is to win. Now move. What happens next violates every principle of careful, professional military planning, and it works so completely that it becomes a case study in how aggression and speed can substitute for caution and overwhelming force. 7th Army drives west and then north through the Sicilian interior. Through mountain passes that tank doctrine said were unsuitable for armor. Through villages that had not seen military vehicles in living memory. Through heat, dust, broken roads, supply lines that stretched thinner with every mile. Patton drives to the front personally, in his command vehicle, wearing his lacquered helmet and his ivory-handled pistols, and he pushes. When a division commander reports supply difficulties, Patton relieves him and finds someone who will move without the supplies. When units consolidate to wait for flanks to catch up, Patton orders them forward before the flanks arrive. When a bridge is blown, engineers are given hours, not days. July 22, 1943. 12 days after landing, 7th Army enters Palermo, a city of 300,000 people, a major Axis port, a psychological blow to Italian morale so severe that Italian civilian officials are already hanging white sheets from windows before the first American jeep rolls through the gate. This was not in the plan. Back on the eastern coast, Montgomery is still grinding north through the heavily defended mountain terrain around Etna. The Germans have positioned their best troops to stop the British advance, knowing that Messina is the critical objective. Progress is measured in miles per week. Patton turns 7th Army east. Now he has 2 routes to Messina, running parallel to Montgomery, moving faster, through terrain the Germans did not fully defend because no one told them to expect Americans coming from that direction. British commanders are furious. This is not the plan. Patton is running a personal competition with an Allied general when he should be supporting the main effort. They are not wrong about the competition. Patton has written in his diary and will tell his staff openly that he intends to reach Messina before Montgomery. Not because the mission requires it, because he intends to win. German commanders observing from their positions begin sending reports back to Berlin that contain language not typically found in military after-action files. This American general does not fight according to doctrine. His movements are aggressive beyond calculation. He accepts risk that professional analysis says is prohibitive. He moves faster than supply doctrine allows. He attacks before his flanks are secured. He does not wait. These reports are filed, read, and remembered. August 17, 1943, 10 a.m. Patton's lead elements roll into Messina. He enters the city in his command car, climbs out, stands in the central square with the Mediterranean sun hitting his polished helmet, and waits. Montgomery arrives several hours later. The moment Britain's celebrated general sees Patton standing in Messina, already there, waiting, the humiliation is total and wordless. Patton steps forward with genuine, almost theatrical warmth. "It was a horse race, Monty. I won." Montgomery never forgave him. But the more important audience was not Montgomery. It was the German officers who compiled the intelligence reports. 7th Army had crossed terrain declared unsuitable for armor, had captured a major city not in the original plan, had covered more ground in less time through worse conditions than Britain's most experienced force, had moved with a speed and unpredictability that made German defensive planning collapse before it could be executed. German intelligence chief Admiral Wilhelm Canaris receives the Sicily reports and marks a specific section. This American general operates outside the frameworks our tactical doctrine is designed to counter. His decision speed exceeds our response capability. He must be watched. He is watched. Spring 1944, Berlin. Hitler's War Room. The question consuming every intelligence briefing is the same question. Where will the Allies invade France? The answer to this question determines everything. 15 German divisions in the wrong place means the invasion succeeds. 15 divisions in the right place means it fails and potentially ends the war. German intelligence does what intelligence organizations do. It analyzes. It calculates. It maps Allied unit deployments, tracks senior commander movements, models Allied decision-making based on observed behavior. And the conclusion, reached by multiple analysts working independently, is the same. 1st United States Army Group is massing in southeastern England, directly across the Channel from the Pas de Calais, the shortest route to Germany. And commanding 1st United States Army Group is General George S. Patton. The analysis writes itself. The Allies will not waste their most aggressive, most successful offensive commander on a secondary operation. Where Patton is, the real invasion is coming. Hitler holds a conference. His generals present the Calais assessment. Hitler agrees. He repositions the 15th Army, 15 full divisions, to the Pas de Calais, and orders them to hold until Patton's invasion force arrives. June 6, 1944. The Allies land at Normandy. Hitler is not concerned. He has read the intelligence. This is the diversion. The real blow is coming at Calais. Patton is still there. Patton is still coming. Days pass. Weeks pass. Allied forces grind through the hedgerows of Normandy. The fighting is some of the most brutal of the entire war. American casualties mount in the thousands. Progress is measured in fields and tree lines. And through it all, Patton sits in southeastern England, reviewing his men, making speeches, being photographed, appearing at events where German reconnaissance aircraft can photograph his presence. Commanding an army that does not exist. 1st United States Army Group. 33 divisions on paper. Thousands of inflatable rubber tanks positioned on fields visible from the air. Fake landing craft moored in harbors. Entire radio networks broadcasting false traffic, false orders, false supply requests, creating the electronic signature of a massive force preparing for a massive operation. The equipment is rubber, the radio traffic is theater, the divisions are ghosts. Every German intelligence report confirming Patton's presence at Calais is feeding a deception so complete that it freezes 15 German divisions in place for weeks, while the real battle rages 200 miles away. The Allies had built a weapon out of Hitler's own respect for Patton. They had looked at the German mind, seen what it feared, and handed it exactly what it expected to see. When German intelligence finally confirms the truth in July 1944, the 15 divisions at Calais are still there, waiting. They have been waiting for an invasion that is never coming, held in place not by barbed wire or Allied firepower, but by 3 words on a map. Patton is here. This is the moment when Hitler's fear of Patton transitions from tactical to something deeper. He has not been outfought. He has been outthought. Someone looked inside the German High Command's decision-making process, found the assumption they would never question, and built an entire operation around exploiting it. And the instrument of that exploitation was Patton's reputation alone. Not his tanks, not his infantry, his name. August 1st, 1944. The ghost becomes real. Patton activates Third Army in France, east of Avranches, and the operation that German commanders have been dreading since Sicily finally begins. What happens in the next 30 days will cover 400 miles of French countryside, liberate more territory than any Allied force in the entire campaign, and produce after-action reports from German commanders that read less like military analysis and more like men trying to describe something they cannot fully understand. Third Army does not advance across France. It detonates. August 1st, Patton activates near Avranches. August 10th, his units are 200 miles into France, bypassing German strongpoints, cutting supply lines, appearing in sectors the Germans had marked as secure. August 25th, Paris is liberated. September 1st, Third Army is approaching the German border. 400 miles. 3 weeks. The entire Normandy campaign from June through July gained approximately 50 miles. Patton gains 400 in less time. The method is not complicated. It is just ruthless. Patton does not wait for flanks to be secured. He does not consolidate after each gain. He does not pause for supply lines to catch up. When his tanks run out of fuel, he orders them to capture German fuel depots and use enemy gasoline to keep moving. When that is not enough, he redirects fuel convoys intended for other Allied units, earning formal complaints from Bradley to Eisenhower. Eisenhower's response is reported to be 3 words. Is he winning? Yes. Then let him steal. German divisional commanders begin requesting Patton briefings separately from general Allied intelligence updates, because the information required to defend against Patton is qualitatively different from the information required to defend against other commanders. Other generals have patterns. Patton has a direction, which is always forward, and everything else is improvised. One German general's report includes a line that is quoted in military histories for the next 80 years. Fighting Patton is like fighting weather. You know it is coming. You cannot prepare for where it will strike. By late August, German High Command is issuing orders specifically naming Patton in operational directives. Not Allied forces, not American armor. Patton. Because the Wehrmacht has concluded, through documented analysis, that standard defensive doctrine is insufficient against this specific commander. New responses are required. New protocols. New ways of thinking about an enemy who has no doctrine you can study. But then, in September 1944, Third Army stops. Not because Germany stopped them, because the fuel runs out. Allied logistics have been stretched to the breaking point across France. The supply system, designed for a slower advance, cannot feed an army moving at Patton's speed. Tanks sit immobile in French fields. Engines cool. Men wait. German commanders receive this news and do something remarkable. They do not celebrate. They understand this is temporary. They know the fuel will eventually arrive. They know what happens when it does. They begin planning their defenses not for today, when Patton is stopped, but for the day the fuel arrives and Patton starts moving again. December 16th, 1944. Hitler launches his last gamble. 80,000 German soldiers, his best remaining armored force, punch through the Ardennes into Belgium and create a crisis that brings the entire Allied advance to the edge of catastrophe. And in a cold conference room in Verdun, 3 days later, Eisenhower asks one man to do something that every military professional in that room privately believes is impossible. When Patton says 3 days and the generals laugh, he is already thinking about the orders he gave his staff before he even arrived at Verdun. The plans are already written. The orders are already prepared. All he needs is permission. What happens next? In 72 hours, through ice and snow and darkness, will be what historians remember when they try to explain what made Patton different from every other general on either side of the war. But that story, the full story of those 72 hours, of 133,000 men turning 90 degrees in winter conditions, begins in Part 2. December 19th, 1944, Verdun, France. Patton tells Eisenhower he can attack north in 3 days. The room laughs. Patton doesn't. Because before he walked into that conference room, he had already ordered his staff to prepare 3 separate attack plans for exactly this scenario. The orders are written. The units are pre-positioned. All he needed was one word from Eisenhower. And he got it. Now, 133,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and 3 full combat divisions have 72 hours to turn 90 degrees through ice, snow, and darkness, and drive north into the largest German offensive since 1940. Military historians will debate how he did it for the next 80 years. The answer begins not on the road to Bastogne, but in an argument that almost ended Patton's career before the bulge even started. Because the real obstacle was never the Germans. It was the men on his own side, who believed George Patton was too dangerous to be trusted with an army. Go back 6 months, August 1944. Third Army is burning across France at 400 miles in 3 weeks, a pace so violent it breaks the Allied supply system. Patton's tanks are running on fumes and captured German fuel. His units are operating without secured flanks, without confirmed supply lines, without the methodical consolidation that conventional military doctrine requires before advancing. And Patton is winning. Brilliantly. Completely. Unstoppably. This terrifies certain men in Allied command more than the Germans do. General Omar Bradley, Patton's direct superior, is a careful, deliberate commander who views warfare the way an engineer views a bridge. You calculate the load. You build to specification. You do not exceed rated capacity. Patton exceeds rated capacity every single day, and somehow the bridge holds. Bradley does not understand this, and what Bradley does not understand, Bradley does not trust. The friction begins over fuel. Patton has been redirecting supply convoys, pulling gasoline allocated to other Allied units, and using it to keep Third Army moving. This is not a minor logistical irregularity. This is a senior commander, stealing resources from allies in the middle of a campaign. Bradley files a formal complaint with Eisenhower. Then a second one. Then a third. Eisenhower calls Patton to a private meeting in late August 1944. The exchange is documented in multiple accounts from officers present. Eisenhower begins calmly. "George, you cannot keep taking fuel that isn't allocated to you. Other armies are being slowed because of your requisitions." Bradley is furious. The supply system cannot function if every commander simply takes what he decides he needs. Patton leans forward. "Ike, I have Third Army moving faster than any force in this war. Every mile I take today is a mile we don't have to fight for tomorrow. Give me the fuel, and I will end this campaign by Christmas." Eisenhower's voice hardens. "You don't have the fuel because Monty needs it for Market Garden. That operation is the priority right now." Patton goes still. The silence in the room lasts several seconds. Then, "Market Garden is going to fail." Eisenhower stares at him. "That is not your determination to make, George." Patton is correct. Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's ambitious airborne assault into Holland in September 1944, will fail catastrophically, costing 17,000 Allied casualties and achieving none of its strategic objectives. But in August, pointing this out to Eisenhower is not military analysis. It is insubordination. And Eisenhower makes clear that one more incident, one more unauthorized fuel requisition, one more unilateral decision that violates the command structure will result in Patton being relieved of Third Army command. Patton returns to his headquarters that evening and writes in his diary, "I am being leashed like a dog while the war slips away. History will not forgive this." He is not wrong, but he is also not finished, because in that same headquarters, a quiet conversation is happening between Patton's Chief of Staff, General Hobart Gay, and a logistics officer named Colonel Walter Muller. Muller has been doing something no one asked him to do. For the past 3 weeks, while Third Army was racing across France, Muller has been quietly running calculations. Not supply calculations, contingency calculations. Specifically, how fast could Third Army physically change direction if ordered to do so? Not gradually, not over 2 weeks, immediately. Muller presents his numbers to Gay. Gay looks at them for a long time. Then Gay walks to Patton's office and closes the door behind him. What Muller has calculated is essentially a blueprint for the impossible. Third Army's current disposition along the German border, facing east, can be rotated 90 degrees to face north. Not in 2 weeks, which is what conventional military planning would require. Not in 1 week. In 72 hours. If 3 specific conditions are met: pre-written orders distributed before the turn begins, fuel pre-positioned at relay points along the northern axis, and unit commanders authorized to move on fragmentary orders without waiting for full confirmation from above. That third condition is the one that breaks doctrine completely. Military command structure exists partly to prevent chaos, to ensure units do not move into each other's paths, do not create supply conflicts, do not outrun their communications. Authorizing division commanders to move on incomplete orders, to make major tactical decisions without confirmation, is the kind of thing military manuals describe under the heading of what not to do. It is how friendly fire happens. It is how units get lost. It is how an army dissolves into a mob. Patton reads Muller's plan. He reads it again. Then he calls Gay and Muller into his office together. He asks one question. "If I give the order tonight, can we be moving north by dawn the day after tomorrow?" Muller says, "Yes, sir, if the orders go out in the next 4 hours." Patton nods once. Then, "Write the orders, all 3 versions. North, northeast, northwest. We don't know which direction yet. Write all 3. Don't tell anyone outside this room." December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The Ardennes offensive begins. By the time the scale of the German breakthrough is clear, Patton's 3 attack plans have been sitting in sealed folders for 72 hours. His staff already knows their assignments. His supply officers have already begun quietly pre-positioning fuel. His division commanders have received informal warnings. Be ready to move north, direction and timing unconfirmed. But be ready. December 19th, the Verdun Conference. Eisenhower turns to Patton and asks the question Patton has been preparing for since before the Germans fired their first shell. When can you attack north? December 22nd, 3 days. The laughter in the room is genuine. Even Bradley, who knows Patton better than almost anyone, cannot fully believe it. Montgomery's chief of staff, General Freddie de Guingand, says aloud what most of the room is thinking. Patton is grandstanding. This is theater. It cannot be done. Eisenhower, who has heard Patton make impossible promises before and watched him keep them, says quietly, "Don't be fatuous, George." Fatuous. It is a word Patton will remember for the rest of his life. But Eisenhower gives the order. Go. Patton picks up the field telephone before he is out of the building. He calls Gay at 3rd Army headquarters with 4 words. Activate Plan Nickel. Go. What happens in the next 72 hours is the part that military historians struggle to fully explain, because it does not fit inside any existing framework for how armies are supposed to move. 3rd Army turns north. Not gradually, not in stages, all at once, in darkness, in ice, through roads that are single-lane tracks through frozen forest, in temperatures that freeze engine oil and turn mud into concrete. 133,000 men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of trucks and half-tracks and jeeps and artillery pieces. 3 full divisions. All of them moving simultaneously, at night, through some of the worst terrain in Western Europe, in the worst winter in 20 years. The key is the fragmentary orders. Under normal doctrine, a unit does not move until it receives complete written orders confirming route, objective, timing, adjacent unit positions, and supply arrangements. A division moving without this information risks driving into another division's path, creating traffic collisions on frozen roads, consuming fuel it cannot replace, arriving at coordinates where no one was expecting it. The risks are real. The doctrine exists for good reason. Patton ignores the doctrine entirely. Division commanders receive orders that say, in effect, your objective is north. Your route is this road. Move now. Details to follow. Supply officers receive orders that say, fuel will be at these coordinates at these times. Do not wait for written confirmation. Artillery commanders receive orders that say, displace to these positions tonight. Fire missions will be assigned on arrival. It is, by every standard of professional military practice, organized chaos. At 4 a.m. on December 20th, a column of American tanks is moving north on a road in Luxembourg when it encounters a column of American trucks moving east. The road is 1 lane. The temperature is -12 Celsius. The drivers shout at each other in the dark for 4 minutes. Then the tank commander makes a decision without authorization, drives 2 tanks into a frozen field to let the trucks pass, and the column continues north. The truck commander files no report. The tank commander files no report. They both understand that reports slow things down, and right now, nothing can be allowed to slow things down. This scene, multiplied by hundreds, across dozens of roads, through 3 nights and 2 days, is what the turn of 3rd Army actually looks like. Not a parade, not a coordinated ballet of precise military movement. a barely controlled avalanche of steel and men and fuel, moving north through darkness and cold, because one man decided that chaos moving forward is more valuable than order standing still. December 22nd, exactly 72 hours after Patton said 3 days, the lead elements of Third Army make contact with German forces south of Bastogne. The attack is not subtle. Patton has no interest in subtle. 4th Armored Division drives straight north through German lines with the kind of aggression that his after-action reports will describe simply as sustained offensive pressure, which is military language for hitting the same point over and over until it breaks. December 26th, 1600 hours. A Sherman tank from the 37th Tank Battalion crashes through a German roadblock on the southern edge of Bastogne's perimeter. The commander, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, radios back to 4th Armored Headquarters. Corridor to Bastogne open. Inside the town, soldiers of the 101st Airborne, who have been living on 4 artillery shells per gun per day, with surgeons operating in a stone basement, with no winter clothing, and temperatures that killed men in their foxholes overnight, hear the sound of American tank engines from the south. The siege is broken. Hitler's offensive, the last major German attack in the West, has failed to achieve its critical objective. German after-action reports from the Bulge contain a section specifically analyzing Patton's movement. The conclusion is stated plainly. Third Army achieved in 72 hours what our minimum planning estimate set at 14 days. The movement was executed under conditions our staff assessed as prohibitive for large formation maneuver. We have no doctrinal explanation for how this was accomplished. But the Wehrmacht does not stop analyzing, because they understand something that the Allied commanders are only beginning to fully grasp. Patton has now done this twice. In Sicily, he moved through terrain declared impassable for armor. In the Ardennes, he turned an entire army in weather and conditions declared prohibitive for large formation movement. There is a pattern here, and the pattern is not luck. The pattern is that Patton has discovered something about the relationship between speed and chaos that most professional soldiers never learn. When you move fast enough, the enemy's ability to respond collapses before his will to resist. When you accept chaos as a condition of movement rather than a reason to stop moving, you can go places and do things that careful men cannot. The chaos does not hurt you if you are moving through it. The chaos only hurts the man trying to build a defense against something he cannot predict. German High Command convenes a special intelligence review in January 1945. The subject is not Allied strategy. The subject is not Allied logistics. The subject is one man. They pull every report filed on Patton since Sicily. They map his movements. They analyze his decision timing. They try to identify the pattern in his behavior that would allow German commanders to anticipate his next move. They find no pattern, only direction. Forward. And in that same January, while German analysts are trying to solve Patton, he is already planning his next operation. Looking east at a map of Germany, looking at a river his Third Army has been moving toward since August, the last major geographical barrier before Germany's industrial heartland, the Rhine. Montgomery is planning to cross it with Operation Plunder. Weeks of preparation. Airborne assault. Massive artillery preparation. Maximum publicity. Churchill himself is planning to watch from the riverbank. Patton is planning something different, something quiet. Something that will humiliate Montgomery so completely and so publicly that the story will be told for generations. Not because Patton needs the credit, but because he has decided that the way to end this war fastest is to keep moving, keep pushing, keep crossing every river and breaking every barrier before the enemy can build a defense. And the Rhine is just another river. What happens on the night of March 22, 1945? How Patton crosses Germany's greatest river in darkness with a single infantry division and no air support. And what he does standing on the bridge afterward, in front of photographers, begins in Part 3. Patton has turned an entire army 90 degrees in 72 hours and broken the siege of Bastogne. Hitler's last offensive in the West is collapsing. Third Army is moving east again, faster than ever, burning through Germany's remaining defensive lines like fire through dry paper. And now, Patton is looking at a map with one feature circled in red: the Rhine River, Germany's final natural barrier, the line behind which every remaining German division is preparing to make their last stand. Montgomery has been planning his crossing for weeks. Elaborate, methodical, maximum force, maximum publicity. Meanwhile, German intelligence has been tracking Patton's movements with an obsession that borders on paranoia, filing daily reports on his position, his units, his likely next objective. They know he is coming. They do not know when. They do not know where. And that uncertainty alone is costing them more than the fighting. By March 1945, German after-action reports show something remarkable. Divisions facing Patton's sector of the front are suffering 31% higher casualties than divisions facing other Allied armies. Not because Third Army has more men or better equipment, because Patton attacks before defenders can consolidate, before reinforcements arrive, before the defense has time to become a defense. German 7th Army Commander General Hans Felber writes to Berlin in February 1945. Our losses against Third Army are disproportionate to the forces engaged. The enemy does not allow us time to recover between engagements. Standard defensive rotation is impossible. Units that withdraw to refit are struck again before reorganization is complete. We are being ground down not by mass, but by pace. Felber requests permission to abandon the Rhine's western bank entirely and concentrate all forces behind the river. Berlin refuses. Hitler has declared every position on the western bank a fortress to be held to the last man. Felber knows what this means. His men will die in place while Patton walks through them. German intelligence convenes a special analysis session in February 1945. The subject is predicting Patton's Rhine crossing point. They have good information. They know Third Army's general axis of advance. They know the terrain. They know the engineering capabilities of American bridge units. They calculate 3 probable crossing sites and reinforce all 3 with additional artillery and anti-tank units. They brief Hitler personally. The defense is prepared. They have identified the wrong 3 sites. But this is not the only problem Patton is facing in the winter of 1945. Because while Third Army is dismantling Germany's western defenses, something is happening inside Allied command that threatens to stop Patton more effectively than any German army has managed. The Hammelburg Raid, late February 1945. Intelligence reaches Patton that a German prisoner of war camp at Hammelburg, 60 miles behind enemy lines, contains American officers. Among them, possibly, is Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. Waters is Patton's son-in-law. Patton orders Task Force Bomb, 307 men and 53 vehicles, to drive 60 miles through German-held territory to liberate the camp. The raid is not authorized by Bradley. The force is too small for the mission by any military calculus. It fails. Task Force Bomb is destroyed. Most of the men are killed or captured. Waters is found at Hammelburg, severely wounded. Bradley is furious. The press gets the story. Questions arise about whether Patton risked 300 men to rescue one family member. The political damage is severe. Eisenhower privately tells Bradley he considered relieving Patton over the incident. Patton defends himself in writing, arguing the raid was a legitimate military operation, knowing, as he writes it, that the argument is thin. For 3 weeks in March 1945, Patton's career hangs on a decision Eisenhower has not yet made. Third Army keeps moving because the Army does not stop when its general is under investigation. But Patton knows. One more incident, one more unauthorized operation, and the war ends without him. He writes in his diary, "I have done nothing wrong, except perhaps care too much. History will decide. I intend to give history something worth deciding about." Then, March 22, 1945 arrives, and Patton gives history exactly that. The night is cold and moonless. The Rhine runs black between its banks south of the town of Oppenheim, moving fast, roughly 300 yards wide. On the western bank, soldiers of the 5th Infantry Division are loading into assault boats. No artillery preparation, no air support, no announcement. The men have been told to maintain complete radio silence. Patton's orders are precise. Cross the river. Establish a bridgehead on the eastern bank. Hold until engineers can construct a pontoon bridge. Do it quietly. Do not tell anyone. 2300 hours. The first boats push off from the western bank. The Rhine at Oppenheim is not defended. The Germans have concentrated their forces at the 3 crossing sites their intelligence identified as most probable. Oppenheim is a secondary site, assessed as unlikely due to difficult eastern bank terrain. This assessment is correct. The terrain is difficult. Patton does not care about difficult terrain. Patton has been crossing terrain that experts declared unsuitable since Sicily in 1943. The boats reach midstream. No fire, no flares. The eastern bank sits dark and quiet. Soldiers climb out into shallow water, wade to the bank, spread left and right into defensive positions. The first company is across in 11 minutes. The second follows. Then a third. At 0100 hours on March 23rd, the first German patrol discovers American infantry on the eastern bank of the Rhine and opens fire. By this point, 2 full battalions are across. The patrol is eliminated before it can call for reinforcements. By 0300, a full regiment holds the eastern bank. Engineers begin constructing a pontoon bridge in darkness, working by touch and memory. No lights, no noise beyond what cannot be avoided. The bridge takes 4 hours. At 700, the first American vehicles roll across the Rhine at Oppenheim. Patton calls Bradley from his command vehicle on the western bank. "Brad, don't tell anyone, but we're across." Bradley asks why the secrecy. Patton's answer is precise. "Montgomery is crossing tomorrow. His operation, his moment. Let him have it. I'll tell the world the day after." Montgomery's Operation Plunder launches on March 23rd with everything the Allied command can provide. 21st Army Group, 2 airborne divisions, massive artillery preparation stretching for hours along a front of 25 miles. Churchill watches from the western bank. Photographers capture the moment. The crossing succeeds. The press coverage is extensive and celebratory. That afternoon, Patton calls Bradley again. "Brad, for God's sake, tell the world we're across. I want everyone to know 3rd Army beat Montgomery across the Rhine." The announcement goes out simultaneously to every press bureau in Europe. 3rd Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim the previous night. 1 regiment, assault boats, no artillery preparation, no air support, no announcement. While Montgomery was still conducting his final rehearsals, Patton had already put 2 battalions on the eastern bank. The story runs on the front page of every major newspaper in America and Britain. Then Patton drives to his pontoon bridge over the Rhine, walks to the middle of the span, and stops above the dark water moving beneath him. He unbuckles his uniform and urinates into the Rhine River, while military photographers capture the moment from the western bank. When an aide asks why, Patton grins. "I have been wanting to do that since 1944. This is not a general losing his composure. This is a calculated message delivered with perfect timing to the maximum possible audience. Patton has just crossed Germany's most important river, faster and with fewer resources than Britain's most celebrated general, using a fraction of the preparation time. And he has made certain everyone on Earth knows it. The urination is the punctuation mark. It says, "This river, which Germany has defended as its final barrier, which Montgomery required 3 weeks and 2 airborne divisions to cross, was an inconvenience. We stopped to relieve ourselves here. Then we kept moving." German commanders receive the reports and understand the message completely. General Felber files his final after-action report from the Western Front on March 24th. Third Army crossed the Rhine without preparation, without announcement, without the operational pause our planning assumed would precede a major river crossing. Our defensive dispositions were rendered irrelevant before they could be employed. There is no doctrinal response to an enemy who does not observe the minimum operational requirements that all military planning assumes. The Rhine crossing breaks the last organized German defensive line in the West. What follows is not a battle. It is a pursuit. Third Army drives east into Germany at a pace that recalls the August 1944 charge across France. Erfurt falls. Gotha falls. Third Army reaches the Czech border on April 18th. By the time Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945, Third Army has advanced further, faster, taken more prisoners, and liberated more territory than any other Allied army in the European theater. The final numbers are recorded in the official Third Army history. In the 9 months from activation on August 1, 1944, to VE Day, Third Army advances over 1,000 miles, liberates approximately 12,000 square miles of territory, takes 556,000 prisoners, inflicts over 1 million casualties on German forces. Third Army's own casualties are 160,000, a ratio that military historians describe as extraordinary for offensive operations of that scale and duration. German prisoners interviewed in the immediate post-war period are asked consistently, "Which Allied commander did you fear most?" The answer, documented in interrogation reports across every German formation that fought in the West, is consistent: Patton. Not because of his resources, not because of his numbers, because you never knew where he was going until he was already there. The strategic impact of Patton's campaign is documented in the post-war analysis conducted by the U.S. Army Historical Division. The conclusion, stated in the official report: Third Army's continuous offensive pressure prevented German forces from establishing coherent defensive lines in the West, accelerated the collapse of organized resistance by an estimated 3 to 4 months, and contributed directly to the unconditional surrender of May 8, 1945. Conservative estimates suggest this acceleration saved between 75,000 and 100,000 additional Allied casualties that would have been incurred in a prolonged campaign. In Berlin, in the final weeks, as the Red Army closes from the east and American armies drive from the west, Hitler's inner circle conducts its last strategic discussions in the Führer bunker. Multiple German officers who survived the bunker and were later interviewed by Allied historians, report the same conversation. Hitler, studying maps showing Allied positions closing from both directions, asks which Western commander poses the greatest immediate threat. The answer given by his generals is Patton. Hitler's reported response, according to multiple sources present, is that Patton is the one Allied general who fights the way Germany was supposed to fight. Fast, aggressive, attacking before the enemy can react. The man who took our methods and used them against us better than we did. Coming from the man who invented Blitzkrieg, that is not an insult. It is the most complete military compliment one commander can pay another. After VE Day, Patton is appointed military governor of Bavaria. He lasts 3 months before his public statements about former Nazis in administrative positions generate a political crisis that Eisenhower cannot ignore. Patton is relieved of 3rd Army Command in October 1945. He is given command of 15th Army, a paper formation with no combat role, essentially a military archive unit tasked with writing the history of the war just fought. Patton commands an army of historians. He does not take it well. In December 1945, Patton is involved in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. He dies of his injuries on December 21, 1945, 12 days after the accident. He is 60 years old. He never returns to America. He is buried in Luxembourg with the men of 3rd Army who died in the Ardennes at his specific request. His final diary entry, written 10 days before the accident, contains one sentence that military historians have quoted in virtually every biography written since. "I have done everything I was put here to do. The rest is commentary." But there is one part of Patton's story that most people who know the battles and the campaigns never fully reckon with. One question that the statistics and the victories and the Rhine and Bastogne do not fully answer. What made him different? Not tactically, not logistically. At the deepest level, what separated Patton from every other general on either side of the war? The answer is not what you expect. And it begins not in 1944 or 1943, but decades earlier, in a library, with a young officer reading ancient military history obsessively, looking for something that the military academy curriculum did not teach. That story, and what it tells us about how ordinary men become extraordinary ones, is part 4. From Sicily in 1943 to the Rhine in 1945, Patton covered more than 1,000 miles of enemy territory, turned an entire army 90 degrees in 72 hours during the worst winter in 20 years, crossed Germany's greatest river with a single regiment and no air support, and was feared by name in Hitler's own bunker, while every other Allied commander was referred to only by rank and formation. 3 parts, 4 campaigns, 5 moments that changed the course of the war. But the question that none of the battles, none of the statistics, and none of the after-action reports fully answers is the one that matters most. What happened to the man himself when the guns stopped? And what did he leave behind that still exists today in ways most people who know his name have never considered? Because the end of Patton's story contains something that the legend obscures completely. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter, and in many ways more powerful than anything that happened on any battlefield. Germany surrenders on May 8, 1945. 3rd Army is in Czechoslovakia. Patton's men have driven further east than any other Western Allied force, stopping only because Eisenhower orders them to hold position and allow the Red Army to take Prague. Patton argues against the order. He believes, and will say publicly, that stopping at the Czech border while Soviet forces occupy Eastern Europe is a strategic mistake that will define the next 50 years. He is not wrong. But he is, again, a general arguing policy with politicians, and politicians hold the authority. He is appointed military governor of Bavaria in June 1945. He is 60 years old, at the absolute peak of his military reputation, the most famous American general alive, and the job requires him to sit at a desk and manage the administration of a defeated province. He does it badly. Not because he is incompetent at administration, but because he cannot stop thinking operationally, cannot stop seeing every political problem as a military problem, requiring a decisive solution applied immediately. The crisis comes in September 1945. Patton, in a press conference, makes comments about former Nazi Party members that are interpreted as suggesting they should be allowed to remain in administrative positions because experienced administrators are needed, and party membership was, in many cases, merely political rather than criminal. The statement is clumsy, imprecise, and politically catastrophic. The press erupts. Eisenhower calls Patton to Frankfurt and relieves him of 3rd Army Command. Patton is given 15th Army, a historical unit with no combat role, tasked with writing the official history of the European campaign. Patton commands an army of historians and archivists. He spends his days reviewing documents about battles he fought and dictating his recollections to staff officers with notebooks. His private letters from this period contain a recurring phrase, "I am already a ghost." He plans to retire, plans to return to America, plans to write his memoirs and live quietly, which no one who knew him believed for a moment would actually happen. Those who served with him understood that Patton, without an enemy to fight, without a map and a decision to make, was like an engine running with nothing connected to the drive shaft. The power was there. There was nowhere for it to go. December 9th, 1945. Patton is riding in a staff car near Mannheim, Germany, when the vehicle is struck by a military truck at an intersection. Everyone else in the car is uninjured. Patton, sitting in the back seat, suffers a severe spinal injury. He is paralyzed from the neck down. He lives 12 more days. He dies on December 21st, 1945, in a hospital in Heidelberg, Germany. He never regains movement. He never returns to America. He is 60 years old. His wife Beatrice, who has been flown to Germany to be with him in the hospital, is present when he dies. According to the attending physician's notes, his last coherent words, spoken to Beatrice 2 days before the end, are, "This is a hell of a way to die." He is buried in Luxembourg, at the American Military Cemetery at Ham, among the men of 3rd Army who died in the Ardennes. This is by his explicit request, written in a letter to Beatrice in November 1945, 1 month before the accident. He wrote, "When I go, put me with my men, not in Washington, not in West Point, with the men who followed me into Germany. They deserve the company more than I deserve the honor." The men who laughed at him in Verdun on December 19th, 1944, when he said 3 days, outlived him. Bradley lived until 1981. Montgomery lived until 1976. Eisenhower became President of the United States and lived until 1969. They all wrote memoirs. In every memoir, in every serious treatment of the European campaign, the chapter on the bulge contains the same acknowledgement. What Patton did in those 72 hours was something none of them believed was possible until they watched him do it. Patton himself never read a single word written about him after the war. He died 6 weeks after it ended. The military doctrine Patton embodied, the doctrine that his campaigns demonstrated and proved beyond any theoretical argument, does not die with him. It accelerates. The United States Army spends the decade after World War II systematically analyzing the European campaign, comparing the performance of different commanders, different formations, different operational approaches, and trying to extract transferable principles. The analysis of Third Army's operational record produces conclusions that reshape American military doctrine for the next generation. The core finding, stated in the Army's official post-war assessment, is that sustained offensive tempo, the practice of attacking faster than the enemy can establish defensive response, reduces friendly casualties while multiplying enemy losses at a rate that conventional attritional analysis does not predict. In plain language, moving fast does not just gain ground faster. It saves your own men's lives by denying the enemy the time to kill them. This principle, which Patton applied by instinct and which his campaigns proved empirically, becomes the theoretical foundation of the air-land battle doctrine developed by the U.S. Army in the 1970s and 1980s. Air-land battle, the operational framework that governed American military planning through the Cold War and into the Gulf War of 1991, is built on the concept of deep attack and rapid exploitation, striking the enemy's second and third echelons before they can rotate to the front, moving faster than the defender's decision cycle can respond. The doctrine has a different name and a different technological context. The principle is identical to what Patton demonstrated in France in August 1944. Operation Desert Storm, in January and February of 1991, produces results that stun the world. 100 hours of ground combat. Iraqi forces, the fourth largest army on Earth at the time, collapse so completely and so rapidly that the campaign ends before the full ground offensive plan can be executed. The after-action analysis of Desert Storm identifies sustained offensive tempo as the primary operational factor in the Iraqi collapse. American armored formations moved faster than Iraqi command structures could process. Defensive positions were flanked before they could be reinforced. Units that expected time to prepare were struck before preparation was complete. The Iraqi army did not lose because it was outgunned, though it was. It lost because it was outpaced. The commanders who designed the Desert Storm ground campaign were students of military history. They had read Third Army's operational record. They knew exactly what they were applying. More than 45 years after Patton died in a hospital in Heidelberg, his operational method was winning a war in the Iraqi desert in 100 hours. The deepest lesson of Patton's career is not tactical. It is not about speed or aggression or the value of unpredictability, though all of these matter. The deepest lesson is about the relationship between institutions and individuals, about what happens when a system built for predictability encounters a mind that refuses to be predictable. Every institution, military or otherwise, evolves mechanisms for managing performance that work well for the median case and fail catastrophically for the extreme case. Standard doctrine, standard planning timelines, standard supply calculations, standard risk assessment. All of these tools are calibrated for commanders who perform within expected parameters. They produce reasonable outcomes when applied to reasonable situations. They become obstacles when the situation is unreasonable and the commander is extraordinary. Patton spent his entire career fighting two wars simultaneously. The first war was against Germany. The second was against the Allied command structure, against the doctrine that told him he could not move until his flanks were secured, against the logistics system that told him he could not advance without confirmed supply, against the professional consensus that told him certain things were impossible. He won both wars. But the second war cost him more, exhausted him more, and ultimately killed his career faster than any German offensive could have. The irony is absolute. The system that constrained Patton was the same system that gave him the army, the resources, and the organizational framework that made his campaigns possible. He needed the institution and fought it simultaneously his entire career. This is not a unique story in military history. Billy Mitchell argued that air power would transform warfare, was court-martialed for insubordination, and died in 1936 before seeing his predictions confirmed at Pearl Harbor 5 years later. John Boyd, the fighter pilot who developed energy maneuverability theory and the OODA loop framework that reshaped American air combat doctrine in the 1970s, spent 30 years fighting Air Force bureaucracy and died a colonel when his ideas made generals. Innovators and institutions have always been at war. The institution usually wins the personal battle. The innovator usually wins the historical one. Patton won the historical one completely. Now the detail that most people who know Patton's story have never encountered. In 1947, 2 years after Patton's death, the U.S. Army's Historical Division completes its classified analysis of Third Army's operational record. The report runs to several hundred pages and is marked secret. It remains classified for 23 years. It is declassified in 1970 and enters the public record with almost no press coverage, because by 1970, Vietnam is consuming every available column inch of military journalism, and a report about a general dead for 25 years generates no interest. The report contains one section, buried in an appendix, that has never been widely quoted, despite being one of the most remarkable documents in American military history. The section attempts to calculate the counterfactual. What would the European campaign have cost in time and casualties if Third Army had been commanded by a doctrine-compliant general who followed standard operational procedures? The analysts use the operational records of every other Allied army in the theater as their baseline. They model the campaign as it would have proceeded under conventional tempo. The conclusion, stated in dry, bureaucratic language that does not diminish its content, is as follows. Under standard operational tempo, the European campaign west of the Rhine would have required an additional 4 to 6 months to reach the same terminal positions. Additional Allied casualties under this model, between 90,000 and 130,000. Additional German defensive time would have allowed more complete demolition of infrastructure, more complete removal of concentration camp populations, and significantly greater opportunity for German forces to redeploy to the Eastern Front. One man, one refusal to accept that impossible meant impossible. Between 90,000 and 130,000 people who came home. This is what makes a story worth 90 minutes of your time. Not the tanks, not the rhyme, not the urine and the photographers and the grin. The number at the end. The people who lived because one man in 1944 decided that 3 days was not a boast but a promise. That 400 miles in 3 weeks was not reckless but necessary. That the only thing more dangerous than moving too fast was moving too slow. From a farm in California to the Rhine River to a hospital in Heidelberg, George Patton's entire life was a single argument, made in blood and fuel and 72-hour impossibilities, against the idea that the way things have always been done is the way they must be done. He fought Germany. He fought his allies. He fought his own command structure. He fought every expert who told him what could not be accomplished. And the final accounting, the number that the declassified report puts at 90,000 to 130,000 additional lives saved, is the only eulogy that matters. The men who laughed at him in Verdun on December 19, 1944, were wrong. Eisenhower knew it. Bradley knew it. Montgomery, to his credit, eventually wrote it plainly in his memoirs. Patton was the most effective battlefield commander I encountered on either side during the entire war. High praise, accurate, and 26 years too late for the man it describes. If you have spent 90 minutes with this story and found something in it that goes beyond the battles, share it. Not because the algorithm rewards it, though it does, but because the real history, the history that lives in declassified appendices and after-action reports, and the private letters of men who died before anyone thought to ask them what they had learned, is being forgotten at exactly the speed that the people who lived it are dying. Every story like this one is a document against forgetting. Every view is a vote that the truth, the complicated, uncomfortable, extraordinary truth, is worth more than the legend. Subscribe if you want more. The next one is stranger than this one. Because the most important battles in history are almost never the ones you learned about in school.